His name is Clive Barker. Hellraiser, a film by Clive Barker.
We'll tear your soul apart.
Enjoy the 7th annual Halloween special, or I'll tear your soul apart. Welcome to the 7th annual Halloween special. I'm so happy to be talking about horror movies again this year. As I mentioned in my review for The Addams Family, I'm going to be talking about various horror films. Some of them will be in a mashup with my wife that's going to be released closer to Halloween, and some of them are going to be solo reviews like this one. Hellraiser is obviously a film that I did not see when I was young. It's very violent, and a lot of the violence is sexual in nature, so of course, this movie was a big no-no. But it was the cover of this film that I saw everywhere. Every time I went to Blockbuster or Hollywood Video, that VHS tape, that one in fact, scared the shit out of me. Pinhead, as he became known in subsequent films, much to Clive Barker's dismay, is one creepy-looking bastard. And there was a lot of hype surrounding this movie for me as a young kid because I always heard so much about it. How terrifying and gory it is, and how inappropriate it is, and it's 18 plus and all of this stuff that really made me scared to watch it. But of course, as an adult, I had to eventually watch Hellraiser, and I was really pleased to discover that this movie is a lot more than the things my parents were always concerned about me seeing. Yes, it's very violent, and yes, it's sadomasochistic and all of the things my parents were worried about, but it's also a deeply felt human story, and that's not something I expected. The film was written and directed by Clive Barker from his novel The Hellbound Heart, and this film has an interest in its human characters. In this film, a husband and father is moving into a new house. His brother has been long gone. Apparently his brother goes on a lot of benders, disappears for a long period of time, sometimes winds up in jail. His daughter is there as well, but the woman he's with is not her mother. So automatically there's a lot of family tension from this. When the dad is trying to move a mattress, he cuts his hand, and some of that blood gets on the floorboards in the attic. And out of the floorboards sprouts this wonder of practical effects. And pretty soon this thing forms into this guy's brother, except it's just muscle and flesh. And you learn that he had an affair with his brother's wife, and she is ridiculously infatuated with him. So infatuated, she will kill random men just so he can feed off of them, so that he can get his flesh back. This is a fucking great horror plot. I adore this idea because it doesn't just have the gore and the effects. It pits its characters in psychologically disturbing situations, forcing them to do things they would never want to do, all in the name of a good fuck. I remember what surprised me the most about this film when I first watched it, and that was that Pinhead was not presented as this cultural icon as I had always heard him to be. He was just this really creepy thing that came out of the walls, basically, with all of this S&M shit, and shot hooks into your body and ripped you in half. In fact, I was more scared by the Chatterer, who must have inspired the creative team behind Silent Hill. But that's kind of how it goes with these horror movie icons, isn't it? I mean, when you think of Jason, and then go back and watch the first Friday the 13th, the Jason that we know just really isn't there. Save for Michael Myers in the first Halloween film, a lot of times these horror movie villains become culturally impactful because we decide they are. Sometimes these guys don't even have names in the movie. We just make up the names as horror fans, and that becomes part of the canon. I mentioned those practical effects. They are beautiful. I love when I'm watching a film and during the opening credits, a credit is given specifically for the practical effects. Whenever I see that before the movie even starts, I know I'm in for something cool. If they take the time to credit that person in the main titles, it's going to be fucking awesome. This wasn't a massive budget movie. I believe it was just $1 million, which sure spread a little bit farther in 1987, but that still wasn't that much. And the fact that they shot mostly in one house, this film is actually really inspiring from a lower budget horror perspective, everything they were able to get out of this increasingly disturbing story as the film goes along. But they show this guy quite a bit on screen as he's getting more flesh on his body, and it's awesome. They keep him mostly in shadow, which is very wise, but the light that they do let hit him reflects off of him, makes him look shiny. And I guess this is mild spoilers, so if you've never seen Hellraiser, I'm just gonna warn you, I'm gonna give a little bit away here. I like how the film chooses its victims constantly. Sometimes people are the main character, and sometimes they're just fodder for the bad guys. Because Clare Higgins in the film at first is sort of our twisted protagonist, as she's finding these guys for him to kill. But later on in the film, there's a turn, and the daughter, Kirsty, is now who we're rooting for. And I love how the film is able to set that up throughout its different acts. Interestingly, the late great Roger Ebert, who still remains my favorite film critic of all time, hated this movie, famously. He loathed this movie. And it's funny, I really like it, but this just shows how good of a critic Ebert was. Because if you actually go back and read his review, it's difficult to dispute anything he says. All of his points are very clear, everything makes sense. And that's just how great of a critic he was. Even when you're not on the same page with him, with a film like Hellraiser, you can read his review and be like, you know what, I see where he's coming from. And that'll segue me nicely into some of my issues with the movie. Most of them are budgetary, which I understand, especially from an indie horror perspective, that those things happen a lot. The effects towards the last 5 minutes are very poor. And this isn't just because we're looking back on a movie from 1987. For films of that era, they're poor. And from what I understand, that's because they didn't have much time to achieve these effects and kind of rushed them. And it's very obvious when you watch the movie. Gratefully though, those types of effects are few and far between. Most of the effects are all practical. Some of them are shown a little too much in wides. There's this creature chasing Kirsty through a hallway, and sometimes you see it a little too close, and you start to see the artificiality of it. Some of that is also due to the high definition transfer, and now you can look at things and see them a lot better than you could back in the day when you popped in the VHS tape. But all these years later, Hellraiser still works because the violence is fun, it has great effects, but the reason the movie works as well as it does is because of its human characters. You understand their plight and you feel for them. Everyone feels well realized. Some of the performances don't always work. There's a few sequences that are a little bit hammy, but because the human characters are as well written as they are, you actually give a shit when people are being ripped apart by meat hooks. I'm gonna give Hellraiser a B+. Well guys, that's the first video in our 7th annual Halloween special. Look forward to many more coming very soon. I have a lot of fun stuff I want to talk about this Halloween, and I'm really excited to do so. Thank you guys so much as always for continuing to watch. If you like this, you can click right here and get Stuckmanized.